Thanks everybody for joining in. This is Jeff Abramson. I'm just helping out in the background. We're going to wait another minute or two to get started for breaking the circuit, disrupting the knowledge and supply of improvised weapons. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I think we will start now. So good morning everyone and welcome to today's session on improvised weapons production. My name is Melanie Garcia Flores and it's my pleasure to be your moderator for this event. This event is organized by the Small Arms and Light Weapons Working Group from the Emerging Experts Program of the Forum. And on behalf of all of them, I want to thank you for joining us today. So today that we explore the complexities, technicalities, and implications of improvised weaponry, our goal is to foster a high-level exchange of expertise and to ensure that we cover as much ground as possible. We will follow a strict schedule. So first we will have the panelists' presentations for their remarks. And to make the session interactive as possible, I will encourage the audience to submit the questions during the presentations in the Q&A section. And please indicate if you would like for me to read it for you or you would like to ask to the panelists directly. And if so, we will enable your microphone. And please, before asking the question, state your name and your affiliation. And well, due to time's constraints, no immediate follow-up questions will be allowed during this phase, but you can save them for the general discussion. And following the presentations, we will open the floor for a debate involving the audience and, of course, a dialogue between our panelists if they wish so. And before we begin, a quick reminder to our speakers, I will give a gentle signal when you have 2 minutes. And to everyone, please kindly keep the chat respectful and remind that we will be constantly reviewing the Q&A. Lastly, and to help us refine and improve future sessions, you will get a brief survey right immediately after you leave the webinar. So it will be really appreciated if you could take a moment to share your thoughts. So, to start on the topic, I first would like to state what an improvised weapon is and what are we looking at when we talk about improvised weapons. So, according to the Armor Life, an improvised weapon consists of any commonplace object or material not originally manufactured or intended for use in combat or harm infliction, and these weapons are repurposed to deliver kinetic, piercing, or other damaging effects through its physical contributions or attributes. And experts have concluded that unlike conventional weapons, this can be optimized through ergonomics, balance, repeated durability, improvised variants, which can cause inconsistent performance. So criminals often use these everyday objects as makeshift weapons to bypass gun laws and slip under the radar of law enforcement. So improvised weapons have a long historical development, and usage as well. However, today, according to the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research, there are two primary categories of improvisation as they apply to three weapon types. So we have the improvised explosive devices, we have small arms and light weapons, and uncrewed aerial systems. And the primary improvisation categories can go from modifications or conversion of non-lethal items to lethal items like black firing pistols. And on the other hand, we also have the production of lethal items from zero, from scratch, such as artisanal weapons or firearms, 3D printed firearms, among others. So the problem is that across various conflict and high crime environments, the proliferation of improvised weaponry poses a sophisticated threat to regional stability and human security. And though often they're viewed as rudimentary, improvised weapons now benefit from transnational knowledge networks and the exploitation of dual use materials that elude these traditional arms controls. So, current regulations often miss how technical information and commercial components enhance the lethality of these weapons. Specifically, we look at three main challenges, among others. We have the production challenge and the so-called democratization of manufacturing through online and offline expertise exchange. And we have detection problems regarding the arms race between criminal innovation and the development of high-tech neutralization systems that could work to tackle them. And then there is the ease of repurposing commercial or agricultural supplies into weaponry, which exposes gaps in existing supply chain frameworks. So, to address these, we must move beyond physical provisions and start targeting the collaborative networks driving this innovation through enhanced tracing and international information sharing. And so to start us off, I'd like to introduce Suniva Reinetsen, graduate professional with Unity's Conventional Arms and Ammunition Program. She has worked at the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Seoul and at the UN Global Compact Norway, and she will be discussing mainly on the issue of production and information exchange, drawing upon a recent event Unity had last December on improvised weapons production. So, Suniva, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And good morning, good afternoon to all of you who are joining us. And thank you so much to the forum for having me to discuss this very important and timely topic. So building a little bit on what Melanie already said, so UNIDIR uses the term improvised weapons to refer to non-industrially produced small arms light weapons, as well as improvised explosive devices, which I will refer to as IEDs, and uncrewed aircraft systems, which I will be referring to as UAS, and these are commonly known as drones. So over this presentation, I will be outlining some trends that we have been seeing throughout the research that we have been doing over the last few years, and in particular, current trends. And a common trend that we have seen across these weapon types is that they're usually produced outside the control or licensing systems of states. They've also found that there are some cross-cutting elements between these three weapon types and their acquisition channels. So we therefore felt that it made sense to examine common challenges presented by these three weapon groups together, rather than looking at them separately, because we can then examine common solutions and enable sharing of cross-cutting expertise between the different communities of practice. Because of this, UNIDIR in 2025 decided to hold 5 regional consultations of experts across the different regions where these are present to map key trends pertaining to the improvised production of weapons. And this culminated in the conference Melanie mentioned earlier that we held in December of last year. And in these consultations and in the conference, we found that improvised production of these three types of weapons occur in all regions of the world and across a variety of contexts. So, for example, one thing that we also found was that these weapons are strategically and operationally attractive to actors such as non-state armed groups, organized crime cartels, and terrorist groups for a few different reasons. And so, firstly, they are produced in a decentralized manner, meaning that they are unregulated and difficult to trace. Secondly, the parts and technology to make these weapons are becoming cheaper and more accessible. So the democratization of the technology, as Melanie mentioned earlier, making them relatively cost-effective. And finally, these weapons are much more sophisticated than what most people imagine, and they are continuously being improved upon, both in durability and reliability. And while one reason for this increase is in spread is due to increased availability and sophistication of technology, Unityr has found that the main common enabler for improvised production is not hardware, it's knowledge. So the transfer of technical expertise and know-how across borders, ideologies, and network is what sustains weapons production and supplements the accessibility of commercial technologies and is a key in increasing reliability of these weapons. And Unityr has outlined 4 ways through which this knowledge spreading is happening. So firstly, knowledge and expertise transfer across groups. This knowledge is not just shared within groups having the same ideology or cause. It is also shared between groups that don't share a similar ideology. So for example, Al-Qaeda developed offensive drone capabilities as a result of knowledge and technology transfer from the Houthis. This signals cross-ideological transfer as both groups maintain operational links and cooperation despite their opposing ideologies for pragmatic, tactical, and operational reasons. A second method of transfer is from conflict zones to organized crime cartels. So we are, for example, seeing organized crime actors traveling to conflict settings to learn, train, and import expertise, which they are then bringing back to their cartels to adopt improvised drones and IEDs to carry out attacks against enemy targets, similar to modern warfare techniques that we're seeing in current day wars. And because of this, participants in our conference talked about how, with the increase in conflict zones in the world, there will also be an increase of this type of weapon transfer, this type of knowledge transfer. Thirdly, there is online knowledge transfers through both the open and the dark web. So information on how to make firearms is not only found on the dark web, it can be found on many open source websites, including one that came up in our research lab, which was Odyssey. Encrypted messaging platforms such as Rocket Chat and Telegram have also been used for sharing weapons design files, but also to sell black market weapons and share information on how these black market weapons are made. One example of this was in a Forum on the Arms Trade article released last year about pumpy guns, which are more traditional artisanal weapons, which were accelerated by social media and encrypted messaging platforms. Finally, groups do in-house knowledge development. So through the different layers of knowledge available, non-state armed groups, criminal cartels, and extremist groups have been developing special in-house capabilities or units for improvised weapons productions. So an example of this would be ISIS, which was one of the first terrorist groups to industrialize the procurement and development of drones between 2016 and 2017. And since then, many groups have adopted similar tactics. Finally, the accessibility of knowledge, particularly online, and the close link between improvised weapons production and new technologies has meant that there's a lot more youth becoming involved in these types of productions. So, for example, in non-state armed groups, the production of improvised weapons is mostly driven by younger or tech-savvy recruits. Similarly, criminal and extremist groups who use 3D printed firearms is often also led by younger individuals. And this really leads into a final point that I want to make, which is that improvised weapon production really crosses and collapses barriers between context, ideology, and generations. So there is no barriers left when we talk about improvised weapons. And potential solutions really need to take this into account. So there are many potential approaches to strengthening national, regional, and international responses to this illicit proliferation of improvised weapons across a variety of different layers. So firstly, approaches can be legislative, and policy-oriented. So for example, in our conference, some participant mentioned that existing policy framework at different levels should be revised to keep pace with emerging trends and improvised weapon production. There also needs to look at new legislative approaches. So for example, some member states have criminalized the processing or using of blueprints for the purposing of manufacturing weapons. So even just downloading a blueprint could be criminal activity. And also looking at existing regulations, for example, for blank firearms, could help model a new legislation. Secondly, you can look at operational practices and investigations. So improvisation is a process. It has a variety of steps. And each of these steps has opportunities to strengthen the prevention and disruption of illicit weapons production. So, for example, since we're looking particularly on knowledge, following this flow of online knowledge, not only on the dark web, but also open source platform, could be a very valuable way of doing it. And here you can also have cooperation with, for example, the hosting platforms who can regulate the content that is on their platform. Also, another way knowledge is very useful is with civil society actors who can be involved in in-field and open source investigation, mapping the flows, hotspots, and tendencies related to improvised weapons production. The final group of solutions that I want to mention is information sharing and data collection. So, as someone in the conference said, if the international community cannot move as quickly or as collaboratively as this community does of improvised crafts makers, we will always be one step behind. Because this community is inventive, it's fast adapting, and it's continuously evolving. And so improving information sharing among all relevant stakeholders, which includes national authorities, law enforcement, border control, civil society, postal and shipping companies, and social media platforms, will be essential. And so to do this, we also need stronger data collection, ensuring that those responsible for gathering information are trained to identify, for example, improvised weapons accurately, to then understand emerging developments and identifying common trends. So I think that is all for me from now. I look forward to discussing the issue further later in this panel. I thank you so much for the floor.
Thank you. So there is still one question that you could potentially answer during your presentation time. So Olvina asked, how we effectively move of materials for production of IEDs in Africa? given the porous border problem. So there is this thing about the porous borders. So there is anything probably in this paper that talks about how to deal with this, with borders, and especially in regions where there is prevalent conflict situations.
Yes, so we have had a few conferences discussing this problem, or the main conference as well as some webinars. And this is definitely a significant issue. And I think in most contexts, borders and border control is actually a significant issue. One of the things that is talked about is education of border guards, but unfortunately, where the borders are porous, this might not be sufficient. Unfortunately, I don't think I have a solution. I think I think what is really key about this issue is that it's multi-layered and that you need to solve multiple issues to solve one. And so, yes, unfortunately, I don't think I have any any more information about this other than I think, yeah, addressing the porous border would probably be a way to then address improvised weapons.
Yeah, thank you for that. If there is no other question directed to Suniva, then, well, thank you, Suniva, so much for your insights. It is striking how open source knowledge has outspaced our ability to regulate, and with that democratization of production in mind, or democratization of knowledge. And it is definitely worrying how non-state armed groups can have easy access to these type of weapons and this knowledge. And we should definitely put more efforts in that, more attention in that, to push for an improvement, not only on regulation, but also on targeting these flows of information. So moving forward, our next speaker is Dr. Manuel Balcázar Villarreal. He's the director of MB Consulting. He is a former Deputy General Director for National Security at the Presidents of Mexico and a former advisor for the Chief of the Mexican Navy Intelligence Unit. And he will be discussing mainly on the dual use components of legitimate civilian access that facilitate the production of these weapons. And Dr. Balcazar, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Melanie. I am delighted to be here, and I appreciate too much this invitation to discuss the dual use of many items that are being currently applied for civilian activities, but also are applied by organized crime. First, I would like to say that we are currently on a very specific moment where geopolitical changes are driving too much uncertainty all over the world. And many people might think getting a small weapon or some item to defend themselves would be the best way to deal with uncertainty. And this context is used and abused by organized crime and non-state actors in order to promote their own interests. And as Suniva properly said before, and you also raised the point, Melanie, there are also many knowledge available for many people on the web, and not only in the web, in the palm of their hands with the mobile phones. That's a very important thing. And many people is searching for information, and many criminal groups are manipulating information. And it's like a kind of, I would say, crazy market, because it's many information, more than the human mind can process on a normal activity. So in this context, I think many people, particularly the young ones, are a main target for organized crime. I have been seeing in many places the young ones are recruited by criminal groups on video games, for example, online, and also at cyber cafes or cyber coffees. It's like a old-fashioned, remember, but it's still going on in many places. And let me tell you that I think one of the major issues is the asymmetry, because we have global supply chains of weapons and dual materials, and we have very local specific deployments for the weapons and people on specific dynamics as the ones we heard before about the borders, for example. And in this point, it raises a gap among what national and international level discussions and meetings are going, and what the local authorities and public servants know and how to deal with this. And in these cases, for example, the use of drones is a major challenge on my perspective, because now organized crime are using these devices not only for surveillance, they are also using it for dropping IED, improvised explosive devices. And one other thing that has been very, very warning in Mexico, for example, is the one related with communication. The rise of this Starlink, for example, Starlink platform, giving satellite internet all over the globe almost, has given the criminals also the power to buy as many devices as they need and install it in many places. They use video cameras with solar power, so they can be everywhere watching everyone all the time almost. So that's one case, for example. It seems very legitimate to have a surveillance camera for a home, for a business, but now criminals are rising and are constructing their own surveillance net. And with that net, it's very powerful because they can also know the specific points to press in some places and reach many people. For example, in touristic areas, they just give a weapon for the people, a gun, to one or two, and say to them, it's very cheap, the price you are asking the tourists for your services. You can ask for the triple or maybe more, and here is your gun to support you, and I am with you. So I have seen this practice of some cartels like arming young people for supporting their normal current activities as tourists, for example, or delivery in some cases. So we have seen a spiral of violence, like nesting in somehow. And as I said before about the drones, for example, they are focusing on kids very skilled on video games, and they recruit them, and they offer not a major amount of money, but enough to make them go with them, because it's more than they can earn on a normal legal activity, for example. So in that case, I think authorities have not enough information to be aware of how to fight or to deal with these new trends. And the other perspective is in landmines. Also, I have seen in Latin America many cases where landmines with the same IEDs are made. And in cases like Ecuador, for example, they are using dynamite to extort people, and they just threw the cartridge of dynamite in front of the door of the business. So in this case, also we have seen normal activities like mining that use dynamite or TNT, and now also they are using it for extortions in some places. So any activities we might think are ready to be used by criminals. For example, bicycles. These high-tech bicycles that are made with special materials in order to resist more and to endure a hard task. Also, the pipes are being used in some cases to fabricate canyons for criminals. And the knowledge transfer also is very important. There is a very wide open market about mercenaries, and they are not necessarily fighting. They are transferring knowledge in presence for many people. Particularly, I insist, cartels that have the money enough to make some logistics and train and develop their own armies. Also that's very important. And as Suniva said, I think this 3D printing is also a major challenge. not only because it's very easy, relatively, for anyone to print a gun with the blueprints. Also, it's very challenging because authorities are not fully aware of that. I mean, their paradigm is just focusing on traditional firearms made by steel, and they are not looking these new models, these new kinds of guns that are going on. And you have this 3D printer. It's very easy for you to make this kind of weapons, and you can do it on an almost semi-industrial scale. So that's very concerning for me. And there are kind of indicators that might help authorities to raise the alarm and to detect where activities are going on. The first one, I think, is where we have open skies activities. I would say it means, for example, very spacey projects like wind farms, solar farms, mining, oil and gas activities, because in that places many industrial products goes in, like pipes, like drones, like fuel and electricity, of course. And that's a place where authorities are not present and companies are alone. And it's like the perfect place. And also it's used by many people, for example, illegal immigrant networks. And so there are kind of flux of many interests. So the government are not aware, but they should develop some kind of indicators, like, for example, the using of electricity. That's a very important one. And I related this with also the use of AI, because artificial intelligence requires a lot of energy, and there are some places, particularly lonely and remote places, that energy consumption is not that big. But if suddenly it rises, it means something could be going on. It happened, in fact, a few decades ago in Colombia. They were uh, 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 they were taking many mini submarines from the cartels, because they were able to see that many electricity power was on demand on specific places of the territory. And I think that kind of strategies have been forgotten. And getting back to artificial intelligence and all these LLMs available for everyone, there's the possibility to build practically any biological or chemical weapon with products you can find at the supermarket or maybe some technical store. But it's not that difficult. And cartels are like evolving every time more in order to generate more damage to their rivals. So trying to land, let's think about, we have to close the gap among national governments and subnational governments, training specific public servants to be aware of new trends and what they could do at the local place, because I understand national public servants are not going to be like watching every corner of the countries. That's why local public servants can help and support a lot, but they do not have the full knowledge, so the gap has to be closed. The second thing would be thinking about like indicators. One could be the massive consume of energy, and also think these new ways of production of energy, like solar and wind, that normally are for a legal use, but also can have an illegal use. And the other thing is not like dual, but it's money laundering. I think it's very important for local and governments and national governments to improve their capabilities in order to track the money, particularly cryptocurrencies that are mostly out of the radar of many governments. And that would be the third point. And a partnership with civil society and private sector, I think also is very important in order to be checking this kind of information and be able to figure out some trends and patterns that might be driving this dual use of materials. And as I said when I start, many people are having very big gaps of uncertainty. So this uncertainty is not going to be solved with weapons or with violence schemes. It has to be addressed with government and civil society initiatives deployed to trust and rebuild to build the trust among people, and that they are free of danger. And if they see something that might be threatening them, they can call or authorities, and they be able to reply. But it's not that easy, because authorities sometimes are not enough, are not fully aware of these new threats we are discussing here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balcázar, for your insights. I think it is quite relevant, and how common use components and common activities are being turning against even populations to extort them, or how criminal groups use them to recruit them. You know, like you mentioned mining, or how video games or cyber cafes can be used to to reach these purposes of the criminal groups. And it is very, very worrying how also authorities lack these kind of trainings to tackle them. And I mean, I think from both of the presentations, we have the problem that the information is the real challenge, and how to address it will be the real challenge for our authorities and international organizations in order to regulate this. But before we finish with Dr. Balcázar presentation, there is one question in the chat that I would like to read, but I cannot find it. I think it was from Sebastian Meyer.
Is it the question in the
Jeff,
Q&A about drones?
yeah,
Are there
that
any
one.
international standards on how to regulate the area or usage of drones, such as in public spaces?
Wow, thank you, Melanie and Jeff. It's a very interesting question, because I think by now it's not that easy to regulate the drones. And I think many issues related to these dual materials or items are not necessary to be faced with regulations, because regulations might not be enough. For example, I was thinking about these optic fiber drones that are more capable than ordinary ones. Of course, they have less range, but they are unable to take down with this signal inhibiting. So that's why I think there could be there should be, sorry, some very intensive working with civil society, like trying to make people and user conscious of the danger it might cause to any things, any people. And also in this working with civil society and private sector, the capability to have a almost 24/7 channel to report any disrupt different to that. And let me tell you very specific example. It was not related with drones, but was related with this. They were called here in Mexico Chinese balloons. There were some balloons that you turn on a light like a candle, and then the balloon start flying. And it was very, very funny, very good looking, and very funny to see the balloon flying. And it supposed your wishes were the balloon. And it was soon, maybe after 1.5 or 2 years, it was like an epidemic, because everywhere were the rest of the balloons, in the houses, in the parks, everywhere. So they raised a very intensive campaign about do not using this kind of balloons, because the damage to environment and the risk it might start because they have fire on it. So it has a relatively good success, and I think all proportion kept, it could be almost the same. We are on a time because Melanie writes it very good. It's about information, and with this information, we are also in the stage of this cognitive security and all the challenge it implicates, like the main task for the 21st century. And in this cognitive perspective, is required not to regulate, on my opinion, because you have not the enough enforcement to apply the rules. So you have to convince and make partnerships with society and individuals in order to try to build more enhanced capabilities and self-regulated activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. And thank you to both Suniva and Dr. Valcázar for these rigorous presentations. I think we have covered a lot of ground from the knowledge exchange online and offline, and also the threats that dual use components can pose. And also now normal activities can be converted to the to like criminal activities now in order to use them for the production of improvised weapons. So, well, now we're moving into the interactive phase of the event, and we will open the floor for questions. I also invite our panelists to build upon each other's points if you wish. And just to remind some ground rules for the audience, please keep your questions concise, state your name and affiliation before asking. And if your question is directed at a specific panelist, please indicate so. Also, well, I think if you would like to speak it aloud, your question directly to a panelist, please just indicate in the Q&A and we will enable your microphone. So there was one question already in the chat to Suniva. First, it says, first of all, I sincerely thank you for this very beneficial presentation. And my question is, how can these dangerous weapons be controlled? We're suffering greatly as victims. So I think this is more like a victim perspective rather than a local authority or international organization perspective.
Well, thank you, Melanie, and thank you so much, Mr. Abraham, for your question. I'm very sad to hear that you are suffering, and I will try my best to answer. I think what is becoming very clear, both from my presentation and from the presentation from Dr. Balcazar, is that there isn't, unfortunately, one solution. There is a lot of things that needs to be done in tandem. And so I don't think I can point to one thing, but there are multiple things that we can do. So I think what I agree very much with Dr. Balcazar's points is that there is, for example, training and collaboration is very important. So both the training of law enforcement to be able to address these issues more, but also collaboration with, as Dr. Balcazar said, private sector and civil society, I think will also be very important in being able to control some of the spread. Unfortunately, that is a work in progress and will take some time. I think other than that, there is some work that can be done through international law. So, for example, UNIDIR is currently helping some international legal processes coming up later this year, which are working, among other things, to better control and map the spread of these weapons and helping law enforcement to then be able to track and stop these weapons. But unfortunately, international law is a very slow process, and so that is still a few years down the line. But I think that might be it for my question, or for my answer right now. But of course, I can also outline other areas of possible intervention if that is something that would be desired.
Thank you, Sunniva, very much for that answer. Now there is another question open, so any of you can take it. Are there any significant efforts by the UN and other international organizations toward controlling the increasing rise of IEDs and weaponized drones from getting into the hands of non-state armed actors?
Please, Suniva.
Okay,
They
yes.
say UN, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. So as I mentioned, there is one current legal project being done. So it is updating the POA, Program of Action, through an I'm trying to remember all of the acronyms. So it's the Open-Ended Technical Expert Group that is working to develop tracing and tracking of improvised weapons. And so that is something that is currently in the pipeline and that we are working to support. Additionally, UNIDER is continuously doing research on this topic, and we are putting together conferences, webinars, and also networks where experts can meet and share insight. So that this is a continuous project that we're working on and hoping to continue throughout 2026 to find new avenues for us to contribute towards this issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Zuniva, for that. I think this is very relevant, and I think we should keep an eye on those developments within the UN or in general international organizations. So there is another question directed to Dr. Valcázar. What could be your recommendations for the Mexican government to control and prevent the use of improvised weapons that are harming peaceful citizens?
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you for the question. I think they should have a record on the private sector activities deployed on field, because where I have seen more the beginning of use and training of these EIDs is not in the cities. In the cities, they use these devices when they have been already tested. But previously, they go to the places where is almost no one except private companies or communities, social, civil society. But the problem is that nobody explains that. For example, I have been some cases in the field with trackers, and these trackers have like magician eyes, because they just with a sight can see many things that we, the normal civilians, are not aware to see, like some devices to explode these IEDs on the ground, but also that were dropped by drones, for example. And I have questioned myself why these people is not working with government in order to develop a way to assess the patterns on the field, and transmit this knowledge. And these people have been on the places for all their lives, and that's why they have the ability to register a small variety on the ground, and they can very precisely tell you what's going on. But they are not talking with government. I think government by now has been a bit closed, and also this administrative design in Mexico, where you have three orders of government, which is municipal, state, and federal, makes so difficult this knowledge transfer, and it's like a jam. So it would be very useful to start, and we used to deploy that when I was in the government. They were called coordination groups, and we were traveling all over the country, all the weeks of the year, like having meetings, very specific meetings with these local authorities, in order to know what was going on, and try to get the answers to some specific question, or raise specific things that were being happening on the ground. So I think that model could work now for Mexican government, in order to to gather and get this knowledge from the field to the top level and be able, for example, to make the consultancies with United Nations and other more experienced actors, and then come back to the field again and say, well, this is the way we can protect non-involved civilians. That would be my answer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balcázar, for your answer. And moving forward, there is another question for Suniva. So, could you please provide an example of organized crime groups or cartels that you mentioned which travel to conflict zones to acquire know-how on producing improvised weapons? Thank you. And I think this could be also complemented by Dr. Balcázar about, I don't know, probably a Latin American perspective as well.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the question. So I this was something that came up during our conference, and it was one of the NGO participants who shared. And so it's if I don't know the particular name of the cartel, but it was a Latin American cartel. But I can share the report that it's from as a link in the Q&A to answer the question, so that you can read about it. But yes, unfortunately, I can't share a name, but I can share the report for which is the source of the information.
Yes, thank you. We have seen the first cartel in Mexico that was like looking for mercenaries and knowledge all over the world. It was the Zetas, but it's a cartel that is almost finished. But this school, let's call it that way, was recovered by Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación and Sinaloa, and they have sent people to Colombia mainly, where they have many knowledge, sources of knowledge from the paramilitary, from drug dealers, from army, and also they have been enrolled to fight in Ukraine. There is a small group of Mexicans, and it's not clear, but it's supposed they are linked to some specific cartels in order to see the better ways to have new weapons technology. And let me tell you also that, for example, I have seen in the northern part of Mexico, they have like artisanal armored vehicles that they do themselves. So the point is that by producing these kind of vehicles, then the cartels need more firepower, let's call it that way. So that was the point when the use of drones rise mostly, because they need to stop that kind of vehicles, and they were not able to stop them with ordinary stuff. So they start arming these kind of drones, and they develop kind of barrel that can drop 6 devices almost at the same time. So yeah, Cartel Jalisco is now the most one, but it's like a cartel arms race, I would say, that they are looking all over the world. And in past years also, we were able to see in Latin America some people coming from conflicts in Africa that came by Brazil and Ecuador, and they were spreading practically all over the hemisphere, and they were ready to do whatever they need to do, because the government, even the governments in the region, even were not aware. They were in their countries, and they need to fully fight their basic needs. So they are like offering their knowledge to the best money they find in the place.
Thank you very much for both of your answers. I think that's a very interesting trend, and I think if we see it, for instance, now in Latin America, in some cartels organized non-state armed groups, I think probably there's something that we can see replicated in other regions. Well, now we have one question as well, saying IEDs has come the preferred weapon for terrorist groups. Therefore, we must develop strong measures to regulate and control it. I think it's more like a comment, but if any one of you would like to expand on that, please, you're welcome to.
I would like to return very briefly to the case of the victims because I think that's a very strong phase of this violence, and people maybe are not fully aware their condition like PST, post-traumatic stress disorder. Every time you are exposed to violence as a victim, mostly you have developed this kind of syndrome and or disorder. So it's very important for this victim that have said that hey, what can I do? Because it's like a calling help yeah, and in this thing there are not many things that can be done, particularly if you are still in the middle of the conflict and you have many things going on. What my suggestion would be is to organize a group of victims in order to talk. Is just talking about and taking out of yourself what you are feeling is very valuable. To cry and to say I felt that way in order to reduce the stress you have, because when you are in the middle of these kind of situations, if you are not releasing your feelings, you might be in a crisis soon or late. So that's very important. And the other thing I would suggest is like working on a virtual environment, so you can develop like some tools and saying, okay, this happened to me. What else can I do? And to try to protect with your community. And I wouldn't suggest to open this group too much, because normally in this kind of conflicts, you don't know who to trust. So everybody it could be danger. It be trustable today and not trustable tomorrow. But it's very important to speak out and with your family, with your closest person, in order to try to keep your mental health stable. Thank you.
Thank you very much for going back to that topic. I think it's also quite relevant and sometimes a topic that we left aside regarding how victims also live this and also how victims or populations in general can contribute to the solutions of improvised weapons production, especially because we have a lack of knowledge, first of all, but within local authorities, national authorities to control these weapons or the production of these weapons. But at the same time, there is an uncontrolled innovation pattern that sometimes it's impossible to actually deal with it just with regulations. And so now that we are reaching to the limit of our time, I think I can take one question more, if there is any. If not, I will like to reference something that was greeting in the chat from the Intergovernmental Authority Development Regional Strategy that aims to accelerate regional integration and enhance security and foster sustainable development across the member states of the IGAD from the Horn of Africa. And it acts in a 5-year framework from the IGAD Vision 2020 50. And I think this is particularly relevant if anyone wants to look on it, because they have a pillar on peace and security to address conflict prevention, transboundary security threats, and humanitarian affairs. And we have one last question, so I would like to invite our panelists to keep it brief for the answer. So, what are the likely strong measures to put in place to mitigate IEDs and the use of drones?
It's a very good question. I think I can start and then maybe Dr. Balcazar can jump in. So I don't know how strong they mean with strong measures, but I think one of the things that we're working on is the tracking and tracing. And I saw that there was also a question in the chat about whether it's possible to track drones using their registration numbers. And one of the issues with improvised weapons is that they are more or less unregulated, meaning that they don't have the same production numbers as you would normally have from a factory, because especially if they're made for illicit purposes, they will not want it to be able to be tracked. And so one of the things that is in the pipeline for us is the tracking and tracing of different weapons. And yeah, so I thought that would be a little bit of an answer, hopefully, to both questions. And then Dr. Balcazar, if you want to jump in, please feel free to.
Yes, thank you, Suniva, so much. Well, I was thinking about like trying to monitor some selling websites. That would be one, and the other would be the customs, because the drones normally use the commercial channels. I haven't seen yet data about smuggling drones. And of course, you cannot do it in the whole country, but you have to get support by patterns in some specific places. I mean, the drones are not going to be used in areas where there's no conflict, except there's a specific intention to cause harm on some population. But customs and selling websites could be one point, and like raising some warning for the buyers, because to make them fully aware that they are having an item that will be used only for legal purposes. That would be also an interesting idea to explore. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answers. And unfortunately, that's all that we have for the open debate and for our event today. And I want to thank our audience for the excellent questions. And of course, a big thank you to our panelists for their profound contributions, for their very interesting points. And of course, Jeff, for allowing us to organize this relevant event. It is clear that the issue of improvised weapons production remains a critical, evolving, and complex field that requires continuous scrutiny. I recommend all of our audience to keep in track of UNIDIR's research and events on improvised weapons, and of course, the work of Dr. Balcazar, which brings a great amount of expertise on the topic. And just a quick reminder about our survey that will pop up after you exit the webinar. We would love to hear your feedback and suggestions. And there will be a follow-up with the recordings of today's session and an event report. They will be available in the forum's webpage, so stay tuned. And thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our panelists once again, and keep update with the following forum online events and publications. And I wish you all a great day.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yes, thank you so much.